At her funeral, I stood alone, grief-stricken, while George and Stuart seemed cold, almost indifferent. After her death, George's hostility became more open, while Stuart felt emboldened and took every opportunity to remind me that I wasn't really part of the family.
You know, Mom's gone now. You don't have to keep pretending to care about this family.
As much as you and Dad hate me, that still doesn't change the fact that we're family, Stuart. And yeah, I hate both of you, but Mom would want me to make sure you guys were okay. So yeah, I'll keep visiting you.
Oh, please. Once Mom passed away, you went back to being the dirty orphan you always were. You're not family. You're just the runt that Mom brought home one day.
My name is Trent, and I've spent my entire life feeling like I was on the outside looking in. When I was very young, I wanted a family more than anything in the world, and I longed to be adopted. My real parents had passed away when I was a baby, and I had no other family, and so I ended up the adoption system. I used to think being adopted meant finding a home where I'd finally belong. Instead, it brought me into a family that treated me like a stain on their otherwise perfect life. I was 6 when I met Eleanor and George. Eleanor knelt down to my level, her soft hands brushing a tear from my cheek.
You're safe now. I know things have been hard, but we are going to be your new family. I promise that we'll love and protect you for the rest of your life.
I believed her. George stood stiffly behind her, already looking annoyed. And then there was Stuart, their son, a year older than me, peeking out from behind George's leg. He smirked like he already had plans for me. From the first night, I knew this wouldn't be easy.
So you're my new brother? Mom says I have to share my room with you. Guess you're not used to anything nice, huh?
I didn't mean to take your space.
Whatever. Just don't touch my stuff, orphan. If you do, you'll be sorry.
The word orphan followed me for years, spat from Stuart's mouth like venom. He'd tease me at school, call me names, and tell anyone who'd listen that I didn't really belong to his family. George never stepped in. He'd simply shake his head, muttering, "Boys will be boys." I honestly think that he only agreed to adopt me to make Eleanor happy. In fact, she was the only solace I had. She truly loved me and tried to shield me from their cruelty. When Stuart broke my favorite toy, Eleanor bought me a new one. When George scolded me for being too sensitive, she'd sneak into my room to read me stories until I fell asleep. But even Eleanor's love couldn't protect me from the constant onslaught. By the time I turned 15, I had learned to keep my head down. Stuart's bullying had grown sharper, both physically and emotionally.
You're lucky Mom's so soft. If it were up to Dad and I, you'd be back in the system where you belong, instead of being a stain on our family. I wish you were never even born.
I said nothing, even as my fists clenched. Eleanor's voice was the only thing keeping me calm. She'd tell me I was special, that I had potential, and that one day I'd make a life for myself, far away from George and Stuart. I wish she had divorced George and that the two of us could have left those morons behind, but she loved them just as much as she loved me. She tried to get them to be nicer to me, but it never worked. After I turned 18, I finally got a job and moved out. It wasn't easy, but I was determined. I started small, working odd jobs, saving every penny. I used that money to invest in cheap properties. At first, I was just flipping them. I would buy the property for cheap, fix it, and then sell it to make a profit. But eventually, I started keeping them and making them into affordable homes and apartments that I would rent out. I never charged more than what people could pay, though. I know that I could make more money if I charged more, but it was never my goal to be rich, only to make a little money and help people find a home that they could afford. It became my passion. For the first time, I felt like I was building something of my own. Eleanor was my biggest supporter. She'd call me every week to check in, sometimes slipping me small amounts of money, despite my insistence that I didn't need it.
You're doing so well, Trent. I'm so proud of you, and you're helping out so many people too.
I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for all the guidance. She was the only reason I still visited that house. George barely acknowledged me, and Stuart's jabs turned into outright mockery whenever I showed up.
Still playing handyman, huh? Guess someone's got to fix toilets for a living.
I ignored him, channeling my frustration into my work, but everything fell apart the day Eleanor died. Her death came out of nowhere. According to George and Stuart, She had had a stroke and fell down the stairs. But something about it didn't sit right with me. She'd been perfectly healthy, always careful. At her funeral, I stood alone, grief-stricken, while George and Stuart seemed cold, almost indifferent. After her death, George's hostility became more open, while Stuart felt emboldened and took every opportunity to remind me that I wasn't really part of the family.
You know, Mom's gone now. You don't have to keep pretending to care about this family.
As much as you and Dad hate me, that still doesn't change the fact that we're family, Stuart. And yeah, I hate both of you, but Mom would want me to make sure you guys were okay. So yeah, I'll keep visiting you.
Oh, please. Once Mom passed away, you went back to being the dirty orphan you always were. You're not family. You're just the runt that Mom brought home one day.
Part of me wanted to just cut ties with both of them. I mean, it wasn't like they wanted to associate with me. The perfect example was when Stuart got married. They didn't even invite me. Annoyed, I asked my dad why he didn't. Why wasn't I invited?
It's Stuart's day. He didn't want you there. And honestly, neither do I. My wife forced me to take you in, but I really didn't want to, and now that she's gone, we can all just stop pretending like we give a crap about each other.
That cut deep, but I swallowed my anger. Instead of lashing out, I left. After that, I threw myself into my work, expanding my business and growing my portfolio. I didn't need them. I'd prove that to myself every day. As much as I knew it would have made Eleanor sad, I also knew that keeping them at a distance and treating them like strangers was the best thing for me. A few years later, though, George and Stuart showed up at my office. I was surprised to see them, especially Stuart, who looked as smug as ever. I, of course, knew that they wanted something from me.
We've got a proposition for you. We have some prime real estate on our hands, and if you help us develop these, we'll cut you in on the profits.
Why me?
Well, both of us hate to say it, but you're good at this kind of thing. These aren't high-end properties, but we've seen you flip such places into glamorous homes before. We figured that we might as well put your talents to use for the family.
Family? The word tasted bitter, but I forced a smile. There was, of course, something more to this deal than they were letting on, and I wanted to know what it was. Let me look into it. I do have some people that can design some homes for these sites that can make some good money. I'll get back to you. I didn't trust them. Something about the deal felt off, so I contacted a lawyer friend to investigate the properties. What he found made my blood boil. It took considerable amounts of money and time to investigate the information, but he discovered that the properties had been part of Eleanor's family estate. They were never George's or Stuart's to sell. In fact, they'd been held in trust for me. But a corrupt lawyer, working with George and Stuart, had kept the trust hidden, hoping for a payout. In fact, my lawyer was only able to discover all this because he broke into George and Stuart's lawyer's office. I hadn't asked him to do so, but I was glad that he did. I confronted George and Stuart at the family home. You lied to me. These properties belong to me.
Don't be dramatic. They belong to your brother and I. Why else would our names be on the ownership paperwork?
No, they're not. You've stolen them from me. I know that they were to be a part of my inheritance from Mom.
Oh, please. What are you going to do about it? If you try to file a motion to take them back, we'll just have our attorney make the will disappear, and then it's your word versus ours.
I didn't answer. I just told them to leave my site at once. However, once they were gone, I did exactly that. I filed charges with the police and even presented the evidence that my lawyer had come up with. The police were not pleased with how I had obtained the information, but they were willing to overlook it for the moment to secure a conviction. So, when George was arrested for theft and fraud and sentenced to just 1 year in prison before being released, it came as no surprise. Stuart, on the other hand, predictably fled. The police searched for him for months, but were never able to catch him. He was elusive and managed to evade custody. Sometime later, I came home from the office one night and found a stranger in my home. The man ambushed me outside with a knife and attempted to kill me, but undercover officers, stationed nearby on a hunch, intervened just in time. They had long suspected that Stuart might either attack me himself or send someone else to do it, so they had me under secret surveillance. Thankfully, their instincts proved correct, and they managed to prevent this stranger from taking my life. Under interrogation, the attacker confessed that Stuart had hired him. Worse, he also admitted that Stuart had hired him years earlier to kill Eleanor
because he knew something about her will that made him hate her. He said the first job was a staircase accident that he made look like a stroke. We think your brother was behind your mother's death. Hearing that broke something inside me. Stuart hadn't just stolen from me. He'd stolen my mother, the one person who'd ever truly loved me. I knew I couldn't rely on the police to stop Stuart. He'd gotten away with murder once. I couldn't let him do it again. So, I made a decision. If he wanted to play dirty, I'd fight fire with fire. I found someone who could make Stuart disappear. Most of the people I rented to were upstanding citizens, but more than a few didn't operate within the bounds of the law. It didn't take long before I found one that would do something without questions asked, providing I pay them well. Weeks later, the police appeared at my front door with news that Stuart had been found. He had been with my father, and the two of them had been in a car accident. I could tell by the way the police were asking questions that they didn't buy, that there was no foul play, but they also couldn't find any evidence to suggest that there had been. I, of course, knew the truth, but I wasn't going to share that information with the police. Months later, as I stood over their graves, I felt no remorse. They had spent their lives tormenting me, and in the end, they got what they deserved. In truth, I didn't know if George had been involved with my mother's death, but since he had helped cover up the existence of her will, I couldn't help but feel like if he didn't help to order the hit on my life, that he at least condoned it. After their deaths, I had my lawyer file to get a copy of Eleanor's will, and sure enough, the properties that Stuart and George had stolen were indeed supposed to be mine. After some shuffling of paperwork, I was given ownership of them, and I did end up converting them into a low-income housing development. In my mother's honor, I made everything at cost and didn't make a penny of profit. It just felt right that I should help as many people as possible, and I even named the development after her. Eleanor Park Estates. To be honest, they are among some of the most beautiful homes I have ever been involved with developing. I know that Eleanor would hate what I had done, but I just couldn't let them get away with what they did to her. I mean, they had always been bullies to me, but I could take the slings and arrows they shot my way, but the fact that they hurt her, that is something I could never forgive. Of course, being the last living relative of theirs, and as such, the only heir to their estates didn't hurt either. Thanks for watching.